As we wrap up our discussion on the roles, skills, competencies of a manager, let's look at one final individual from history. And let's look at Max Weber. So similar to Spalding, Max Weber's interest in management aligned with his faith and his religious beliefs. So Max Weber was a German or Prussian sociologist, and he visited the US and saw how businesses were organized and run there. Now, in Prussia at the time, what he saw is businesses that were created by the monarchy. The kings and queens determined what businesses should operate, and often it was their friends, their family members who were put in charge. There was also a lot of government oversight and regulation in terms of how businesses could operate. So Weber went to the US and he saw what he called the spirit of capitalism, what he called bureaucracy, which was a system in which we hired professionals to manage and lead organizations. It wasn't chosen by the government. It wasn't nepotism, choosing family members to lead. It was experts in the field. Now, when it comes to Max Weber's view of that spirit of capitalism, of how businesses can best be managed, he was a bit of an idealist. In terms of what he saw, he thought was so much better in the US than what he was seeing in his home country. He also saw that it aligned with the Protestant Reformation. So just to give you a little bit of context. So in Catholicism at the time, what the Catholic teachings say is that there's a vow of poverty, right? It is a sin to accumulate money. We should be giving everything we earn back to the church, back to helping our fellow man. And the Protestant Reformation said, you know what? Making profit, making money, that's okay. That's not against a God. And so if we look at Max Weber, what he's looking at in terms of this structure is based on the idea that your occupation, the job that you do, is a calling from God. Okay, God gave you special talents, and that it is a sin to waste them. So wasting time is a deadly sin. You are not then using all those talents and expertise that God has given you. According to Weber, reducing the profits of the organization is also against God's will. It's wasteful. So while a business can be profit-driven and can accumulate profit, unlike, let's say, under Catholicism, it's still seeking luxury. Flaunting your money is still a sin. So instead, what you should be doing is, if your business is making lots of profit, it should be reinvested in the company. So you can see the similarity here between Weber and Spalding in terms of taking that profits and putting it back into the organization. I'm just going to move my face here a little bit so we can see. But according to Weber, what we need to do to fight nepotism and corruption is that we need a bureaucratic organization governed by the most technically and educated people. So he was an advocate for bureaucracy. Now, what did he mean by bureaucracy? Because bureaucracy today, right, gets kind of a bad rap. That means too much management. We can't be effective because there's just too many people in that chain of command. Well, what he means by bureaucracy is that he means a business that is hired by professional managers. That's what is the most modern and efficient method of organization. So what does that organization look like? Well, like the other individuals we've been looking at, he believed in specialization and divisions of labor. So at this point, many people have adopted Adam Smith's proof in terms of production that dividing the labor and specializing the work can increase the output. Weber was also an advocate for rules. Processes are important. Job descriptions are important. It's important to know what is expected of people So about formalizing processes within the organization. There should still be an organizational structure, a centralized structure like we've seen with some of the people we've discussed already. And there should be a formal selection process. So we're not going to hire our relatives or our buddies, but we are going to have a set out job description and a formal hiring process where we have certain criteria we need to select our person from. Because remember, according to Weber, the business is most effective if you hire professional managers who know how to lead. And so we need people also who have managerial dedication. So just like the previous people we've been discussing, someone who has the interest of the organization at heart, that commitment. We also need managers who are impartial. So when they're making decisions that is based on following the rules and processes. So again, not let's say an organization, the boss's kid works in your department, not letting the boss's kid get away with doing nothing and blaming other people for the fact that the department is not doing well. So we need impartiality of management and a formal selection process so that we can ensure that we are equitable when we assess people's work and when we select people to work for us. Now, Weber did identify some challenges with that bureaucracy, with hiring experts to be the managers. And one of them is the issue that was prevalent in Prussia and Germany at the time, where the system was run by the government. So even though you might have a society where most of the businesses are for-profit, not government-involved businesses, you're still in your country going to have some government-funded organizations. And he said the challenge with those is that even if you're hiring professional managers to run those organizations, they're still going to suffer from some of the problems that we were seeing in Germany. So these organizations that are government-funded, they're going to be focused on self-preservation. There's really not an incentive for them to innovate, to do things differently, to do things more efficiently, because they're not being profit-driven. So even if you have the experts running the place, there's still no incentive to innovate, simply by the nature that it's not competitive, and there's no incentive really for being more efficient and more innovative. There's also a tendency to become more bloated, protecting jobs. You can't get all of your work done. We simply hire more people to do the work rather than finding more efficient and effective ways to do it. We also said the government-funded organizations tend to lose the ability to make fast decisions, to be responsive. And we've seen, of course, that today in terms of how long it takes for government agencies to make decisions, to implement new strategies. He did find some challenges as well with the bureaucracy, with the managers who are the experts at administration running the organization. So while Weber put great emphasis on process and rules, he also commented that an extreme devotion to rules, that bureaucratic rigidity, meant that there might be a focus simply on process and making it more important than the outcomes, than the goals. So it's about jumping through the hoops. It's about the paperwork, not whether or not the project gets done or gets done to what the expectations are. You can then just blindly repeat past decisions because you're just following the same route as before. He also raised the idea that if you outline the rules and expectations for people in terms of their job performance, it can lead, if it's going to focus too much on unacceptable behavior, what happens is that job description becomes the minimum standard. There's no incentive to work harder, be better, be more efficient. if the job description is simply don't do this, don't do that. People will then just make sure they don't do those things. He also recognized that too much delegation, right, leads to unnecessary duplication. So as we look at our pyramid that is our organization, and we have our upper management, our mid-management, our lower management, as we push the work down and delegate, we become siloed, and then what happens is that each of those managers who delegated below, they now have people who are duplicating. All the departments are doing the same thing, and rather than being more efficient. And we have here that when it comes to bureaucracies, when it comes to these businesses that are managed by these administrative professionals, when they have to make decisions, they are accountable to the upper management, to their employees, to other stakeholders, and so the decisions they make are going to be compromises. And in an effort to appease these special interest groups, it's going to be difficult to innovate, right? Everything is going to be a compromise. So he recognizes that when you have an organization that has a single authority that isn't necessarily accountable to investors, that everyone has to have allegiance to. It's not something where you have to win hearts and minds. In those cases, it's easier to make change. When you are leading a group and you have to win hearts and minds and you have more people who you are accountable to, it's harder to change. And we can see this politically. So if you look at it in Canada, for example, the way that our government works is that you vote in a political party, and then that political party is a cohesive unit that is going to come up with policies and laws. In the States, you elect individuals, which means that decisions about what those laws need to be are negotiated between all those individuals, and you might be part of the same political party and still disagree with the other person. And so because there's now all these groups that you have to get to buy in, then things are compromises, and it's much harder to create change. When you have that single unit that can make, then it's easier to see that change. So as we wrap up our work this week in terms of what does it mean to be a manager, what are the skills of an effective manager, what does the manager do, and finally, what is the structure of an organization to help create that effective manager? I want you to think about a company, an organization that you think is effective. Why do you think it's effective? So think back on the people who are leading that organization. What kind of skills and competencies do they have, not have? Where are they on that Mintzberg triangle we were talking about before? So think about an effective organization, maybe one that's not so effective, and relate it to the discussions that we've been having in terms of what is needed from the person and from the organization to have effective management. If you are working in our course for points, then the last piece we want you to do is to think about a business that you see yourself involved in. And as you look back at these different perspectives and priorities in terms of what it means to be a manager, which of these views of management would you incorporate into your organization? Are there any that you would avoid? Are there any that are not priority? What about the skills and competencies that we've talked about before? So which ones are most important to your organization? So tie a company of your choosing to some of the discussions we've had this week in terms of the role and the qualities of a manager. Put that information into Blackboard to get your points for participation.